I am in the 5th grade, and I am playing outside during recess. And it is a day like today, but perhaps without the rain. It is late fall, and the trees are sprinkling down yellow and orange leaves. The wind is blowing sporadically, such that every few minutes a chilly gust arrives on your face. And I am on the tire swing with my best friend, Robbie, hanging out and talking about who knows what. A good chunk of the class is playing football, I think. I am not really paying attention, but down the hill from the tire swing, a group of mostly boys are running a ball back and forth. Suddenly, the game comes to a halt. Robbie and I look down at it, trying to figure out what is going on. Someone has accused the other team of cheating. The other team is emphatic that that is not the case. Tempers flare, words are exchanged, and finally one of the boys pushes another boy. It is on. The two teams go into a full-tilt elementary school riot, which basically amounts to a lot of pushing and shouting and maybe a little bit of hitting. In a few minutes, the teachers are rushing over to break things up, and from what I can remember, it becomes the largest detention in the history of Concordia Lutheran Elementary School. But up from the hill on the tire swing, I am aloof, indifferent, maybe even a little puzzled. What are they fighting about? I ask Robbie, and he tries to explain the rules to me and what might have happened. Yeah, okay, I say, but who cares? For much of my life, I have felt that I lack the sort of enthusiasm that runs hot in other people. My friend and colleague Roger Jones, who suffers from the same affliction, has coined this term, this condition, passion deficiency. It sounds like a terrible illness, something that belongs in the DSM-5, but I think there's something to it, and it's really not so terrible. I just don't feel the heat of the game when I watch sports. I find it bewildering when people riot over a soccer match. I dislike fighting about political topics, and I would prefer a reasonable conversation any day. There are things that I enjoy tremendously, like riding my bike and doing yoga, but these rarely muster feelings of wild enthusiasm. I appreciate them, I even love them, but appreciation is not passion. Appreciation seems to me cooler and more analytic, while passion has seemed hot and indiscriminate. Passion, I long ago concluded, is overrated. Or is it? Recently, I have started to wonder, am I missing something? Is that what passion is really about, temperature? Is there something deeper in it than just indiscriminate enthusiasm? This week, as I was wondering about this question, I decided to turn to Nietzsche. I wanted to remind myself what it was that philosopher said about passion, because for him, passion goes much deeper than simply a hot or cool temperament. For Nietzsche, passion is about a way of being in the world. In his book, The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche distinguishes two modes of being in the world that have existed at least since the time of the Greeks. The first is the Apollonian mode. Named after Apollo, the god of rationality, it represents a way of being in the world that is grounded in the intellect. Its beauty is sculptural and refined, like the intricately carved pillars of a Greek temple. It tends towards civilization and control and restraint, and its temperature is cool. It offers neat, orderly explanations for human behavior and existence. The philosophers Plato and Aristotle, who enthroned rationality as the defining characteristic of human beings and who held great skepticism about the body and the emotions, they are key representatives of the Apollonian. The opposing view is the Dionysian mode. And when I think of passion, I think of the Dionysian mode of being in the world. Named for Dionysus, god of wine and pleasure, it represents a way of being that is based around the body and around feeling. Its beauty is raw and unruly, like a Jackson Pollock painting or maybe a rock concert. It is all about feeling deeply and expressing that feeling. It offers no philosophical explanations for why things happen to people. It says that the point, and I think this is really important, the point is to feel life rather than understand it. Nietzsche said that the ancient tragedies, which represent a great depth of feeling but offer no neat intellectual explanations for why people suffer, these were the best examples of the Dionysian way of being in the world. So which of these modes is preferred by Nietzsche? We might imagine that for a philosopher, restraint and intellect would be lauded. But in the birth of tragedy, his preference is unmistakably for the Dionysian view. For Nietzsche, it is a more honest way of being in the world. Rationality, he says, is an artifice that seeks to domesticate life, to put it into neat, understandable boxes. But Nietzsche claims that life is messy and doesn't offer itself to tidy explanations. The point of life, says Nietzsche, is not to think it through, but to feel it and to reflect those feelings back to the world. David Brooks, the New York Times columnist, penned an article last week called Lady Gaga and the Life of Passion. I admit that this article caught my eye because I wanted to see what the conservative writer, David Brooks, said about Lady Gaga more than what he said about passion. But he actually gives a great explanation for what Nietzsche is talking about. Brooks writes that human beings are the only animals who are naturally unfinished. We are composed of forces or drives that seek expression. Passionate people are those who feel such things deeply and seek to articulate them. Some people, writes Brooks, are seized by this task by a fierce longing. He gives the clergy as an example here, which makes me feel good. And he writes, passionate people construct themselves inwardly by expressing themselves outwardly. Members of the clergy sometimes say that they convert themselves from the pulpit. By speaking out their faith, they make themselves more faithful. People who live with passion do the same thing. By teaching, or singing, or writing, or nursing, or parenting, they bring coherence to the scattered impulses we are all born with inside. By doing some outward activity, they understand and define themselves. A life of passion happens when an emotional nature meets a consuming vocation. Passion for Brooks, and also for Nietzsche, I think, is not just about hot temperament. It is rather the peculiar feature of merging the internal world of feeling with the external world of expression. The hot temperature comes from the fierce longing to express those feelings outwardly, to show them to the world, to give them some sort of coherence. And for someone who pursues an artistic vocation, that longing is often too deep to ignore. It simply has to be let out. Now, it is important to note that for Nietzsche, passion does not come without danger. He writes about Bacchus, who was the Roman version of the god Dionysus. A Bacchanalia was a celebration dedicated to Bacchus where the extremes of human passion could be expressed. It had sex and death and intoxication, all of the things that a minister should probably not be preaching about from the pulpit. The Bacchanalia expressed unmitigated passion, the unleashing of wild, chaotic, unruly internal realities. And these realities, writes Nietzsche, are the same ones that can destroy human beings if they are not careful. Nietzsche's views of such dangers has been demonstrated by many examples. And putting aside the ones that I've already given from sports riots, whether in elementary schools or, say, over the World Cup, there are other examples of passion en route to destruction. Amy Winehouse, Kurt Cobain, Jimi Hendrix, considered the iconic artists of their generation, were arguably killed by the trappings of the very passion that propelled them to fame. None of them made it past 27. Sylvia Plath and Vincent van Gogh were suicides. Dylan Thomas, the poet who wrote, "Do not go gentle into that dark night," died from an overdose of alcohol at 39. Our culture holds a firm association between passion and destruction, in part because of these examples. But David Brooks and Nietzsche give such examples an intellectual coherence, I think. If we take them seriously, that the passionate drive is the drive to gather together scattered impulses within ourselves and to express them to the world, we can see plainly why the work of the artist is risky business. When an artist or a passionate person gathers together those impulses, there is no guarantee that the impulses expressed will be pleasant ones. Sometimes they will be terrible. The ancient playwright Euripides suggested that when we yield control to those impulses, the result can either be highly creative or highly destructive. His play was a tragedy in the Nietzschean vein, where the expression of Dionysian passion leads to the downfall of most of its characters. Now, despite the destructive edge that passion maintains, I do not think that it can be neatly gotten rid of. There is an old story, and I've not been able to track down its source, but it goes something like this. An old man and a young man are standing next to the Chartres Cathedral, one of the most beautiful in the world. And the younger asks the older why more of these cathedrals are not built today. And the older man turns to the younger one and says, "In those days, people had faith. Today, people have opinions, and you can't build cathedrals with opinions." I would like to stand before the works of Cobain or Plath or Dylan Thomas and then insert passion for faith. You can't sing Heart-Shaped Box or paint The Starry Night or write Do Not Go Gentle with opinions only. You need passion. You need the fierce longing to gather together one's impulses and express them to the world. You have to be seized with such a passionate longing that it becomes a consuming vocation. So I think that we do need passion. But here is where I differ. I think we also need restraint. I disagree with Nietzsche and Euripides that this is an either-or phenomenon, that you must choose between intellectual restraint or unbounded passion. I actually think that our lives express greater creativity and passion when we are given restraints and limitations. It's passion that is given direction and focus that offers our lives value. You might think about it this way. Let's suppose we were to play a game where I place an object on a table in a room. Which of the following would express more creativity and passion? I lock the object in a box that requires a series of clues to open it, and then I deadbolt the door and lock the windows, leaving you to figure out a way to get in and to discover this object. Or alternatively, I leave the door open and you simply have to walk in and grab the object. One of these requires tremendous creativity and commitment and passion for the game, while the other requires nothing. In this sense, it is restraint and even limitation that lends itself to flourishing creativity and passion. I would suggest it is the same with life. There is nothing laudable about giving in to the destruction of oneself or of others. That's easy, and it has little to do with passion. When passion turns into destruction, it loses the very thing that made it admirable. Instead, I think it is the gathering up of those impulses and directing them to ends that serve beauty and life and humanity that requires tremendous creativity. It is precisely then that passion can flourish as something that is praiseworthy. It is a kind of passion that, even with my own passion, coolness, or deficiency, I can subscribe to. One might call it, a la Nietzsche, a Dionysian passion within the bounds of Apollonian restraint, or less pedantically, a passion that serves life. I'd like to end by paraphrasing an old saying about ministry. Ministry is where your greatest passion meets the world's greatest needs. I think it is precisely there, on the fulcrum of your passion and the world's greatest needs, that the goodness and beauty of life can emerge and bloom. May it be so for all of us. Amen. I love you, and blessings on your journey.